Welcome to Entanglement Radio, transcendent talk for the conscious mind. Join us for inspiring conversations with visionaries in spiritual science, new thought, and conscious healing. Explore the potential and infinite possibilities of what it means to be human with some of the best guests in radio. At Entanglement Radio, it is all connected. Now, here is your host, Angela Levesque, on the OMTimes Radio Network.
Good day. You're listening to Entanglement Radio with Angela Levesque right here on the OMTimes Radio Network. I'm coming to you live today from the beautiful foothills of the Rocky Mountains here in Boise, Idaho. I have a great guest for you today. We have Dr. Carl Greer. He's a Jungian analyst, shaman, and author of Change Your Story, Change Your Life. And next week we have Kim Montanus, and we are going to continue our shamanic theme there as we journey into the inner spaces of the heart. And if you missed last week's show with Dr. Susan Shumsky, I highly suggest you go find that in the archives. And in fact, you can find any of our past shows in the archives if you just go to OMTimes/IOM and or radio.omtimes.com, and you can find all of my past shows there. I've had some great guests. So as we are going to continue our monthly contest with hashtag Entanglement Radio. So if you are on Twitter, you can just send out a tweet with the hashtag Entanglement Radio, and I will enter your name into a monthly draw, and I will be announcing the winner at the first Wednesday of every month. So last month we had the amazing OMTimes host, Sarah Nash, and so we will continue doing that, and you get a free intuitive reading with myself. If you need to get a hold of me at any time during the week, you can email me at angela@hestiahealth.com. You can find me on Twitter and on Facebook at Hestia Health or Entanglement Radio. And yes, I'd love to connect. I'd love to hear from you. As I've done this show, more and more have done so, and so I look forward to more of you doing that. So today we are talking about changing your story, and I can't tell you how important this is. And this is something I had recently thought of. When I used to tell my story of my childhood, I used to say, I was the black sheep and I wasn't understood, and my parents were always pushing me into things that I wasn't interested in and all of that. And then, as I started to really look at that, and I thought, wow, that is really coming from a victimhood perspective. I am playing the victim. And so I decided to look at my story again and look at the themes and the ideas and what really happened. And now I have a new story when I talk about my childhood. And that's really one of tolerance and acceptance. And one of the things that I learned growing up surrounded, in a family, surrounded by people who didn't necessarily have the same worldview as myself, is I learned to be empathic and compassionate. And now as I go out and teach and work with clients, that skill and that understanding of life and being able to see different worldviews has served me. And so I think, even if you think about the black sheep and the symbolism and the metaphor of that, as we're going to talk more about that here today, that is such a different energy, that is such a different idea than, the one of being empowered and being compassionate and empathic and being able to, have conversations with lots of different people, which I do on the show every single week, but I also do with clients in my community, and be able to have conversations with them and meet them where they're at. And so I think that is a completely different place. Instead of victimhood, it's one of empowerment. So we're going to be talking about these stories and why they matter and what it means to be the storyteller of our own lives here today. So let me introduce my guest. After focusing on business for many years, Carl Greer earned a doctorate in clinical psychology and then became a Jungian analyst. The shamanic healing work he does is drawn from a blend of North American and South American indigenous trainings and is influenced by Jungian analytic psychology. He is trained with Peruvian shamans and through Dr. Alberto Vivaldo's Healing the Light Body School, where he's been on staff. He has worked with shamans in South America, the United States, Canada, Australia, Ethiopia, and Outer Mongolia. A clinical psychologist, a philanthropist, Jungian analyst, and shamanic practitioner, Carl Greer teaches at the Jung Institute in Chicago, is on the staff at the Lorraine Replogle Counseling Center. So with that, I feel very honored and blessed to welcome Dr. Carl Greer to the program. Hello, Dr. Greer. How are you doing?
Good morning, Angela. Thank you. Doing good.
Well, I'm happy to have you here. As I said, this is something that has, in the past 6 months, I've really thought about and put some time and effort into understanding some of the things. And before we get there, I wanna start really basic with people. And I think OMTimes listeners probably know or have heard the word shaman or shamanic journey or those types of things. But I really want to start and just give them a general idea. When we use the word shaman, what are we talking about?
Shamans are people who work with energy. They heal. They have a relationship with nature. They work with the past and they work with the future. That's what I would say about that, Angela.
And so I find it interesting when you think of psychology and you think of being a Jungian analyst. And how did you instantly, as you were, you had such a background in psychology, did you instantly see how those two were connected?
I think my interest in shamanism was even earlier. I read the books of Castaneda and people like Lynn Andrews, and I had a certain fascination with it. And I think it was the fascination with the invisible worlds that we can relate to that affect us. And then when I started to study psychology, in particular Jungian psychology, where the same idea was present, these invisible worlds can affect us, I saw the linkages. So they came together in my life and my practice over time.
And so do you find that they, well, tell us first, in what ways did you kind of notice that they were complementary? Or you said that, your shamanistic training informed your clinical psychology. So could you give us a couple of examples on how those two sort of married or bridged together so nicely?
Well, when you think about the question of how to change one's story, you have the first task of being honest with yourself as to really what your story is. And then you have the task of asking yourself, all right, if I'm really honest and I know what it is in all its various chapters, what would I like it to be? And most of us may be able to say all the things we'd like it to be, but we're not able to, for whatever reason, make it happen. And Jungian work and shamanic work help get to these unconscious resistances that keep us from changing our story. So in that sense, they're married, and they both go help us to work in places that we normally, in our rational minds, wouldn't go to. And when we learn to go to those places, we get information and energy that help us change from an old story to a new story.
So as you're listening to, my little monologue at the beginning of this show, and I'm talking about how, I used to, and this actually was really connected because I myself loved Carlos Castaneda's work and how he talks about erasing personal history and that we retell our story over and over again. And that just continues to connect us to that same energy. So from your perspective, as I was talking about, my past and how I saw it as, the black sheep from a place of victimhood. And then I started to realize all of the gifts and benefits that I actually received that I now use later in my life. Is that what you mean by changing, or at least is that an aspect of what you mean about changing your story? Or is it really about just moving forward in a different way?
No, that's what it would be about. I mean, you were able to put some labels and metaphors to your story. You used words like black sheep and victim. And I imagine if you would look at other chapters in your life back at that time, your relationships with people, your psychology, your work, your being of service, your health even. There might have been ways in which each of those areas were affected by your identification with black sheep and victimhood. And at some level, in some place, you decided that wasn't serving you, and you were able to move towards another attitude towards life and things. Some people aren't able to do that on their own, and they need either the help of another or some inner help, which shamanism and Jungian psychology can offer a person.
Well, your book, Change Your Story, Change Your Life, is it's almost a workbook. There are so many. I wish I didn't have to read a book a week for this for this show, because I really would have liked to dig in. But there are so many exercises to help you do exactly what you just said. Is kind of go in and do that inner work on your own, and that to me in itself is very empowering. That you say that you can do so much of this work by yourself with just some information and some exercises on how to do it, instead of you have to go and see somebody and do that work with them.
No, I agree. We live in a world of many experts, and many are very valuable. And I'm not suggesting that people have to become isolated and not use the many healers that are available to us. But I think we also have the ability to do much self-work. And as we do more of it and see that it can work, then we become empowered to do even more. And then we're better able to work more collaboratively with others.
Well, I love that. So if you're interested, you can go check out his website right now, carlgreer.com. When we return, we'll talk about being the storytellers of our life right here on Entanglement Radio with Angela Levesque. We'll be right back.
A conscious lifestyle for a mindful life. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM.
Circle of Hearts Radio is a sanctuary on the airwaves. Join me, Grandmother Elia, in the circle on Sunday, 2 p.m. Eastern, as I share information to both enlighten and nourish your soul.
Being a radio host on IOM FM allows you to build your show on a rich platform with the power of the internet to fulfill your outreach goals and connect with a very specialized and global online audience, unlimited by time and distance. OMTimes Radio will provide you with web relevance, a recognizable conscious brand, and with the standard of excellence that has accompanied every single OMTimes endeavor. Host your show with OMTimes Radio Network. The number one reason girls drop out of school in sub-Saharan Africa is lack of access to feminine hygiene products. The Pads for Schoolgirls Project, an outreach of Humanity Healing International, is changing this paradigm by setting up sewing programs at schools, teaching girls a vocational skill, while producing the reusable pads that help keep them attending classes. The girls pay it forward by making and giving pad kits to other girls in need. To learn more, visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
Hi, this is Sylvia Henderson, intuitive life coach and energy healer. Are you ready to elevate and rise way above your normal? Be sure to listen to my show, Intuitive Transformations, on OMTimes Radio, Sunday evenings at 9 p.m. Eastern. Get the inspiration you need to transform your life.
The cutting edge of conscious radio, OMTimes Radio, IOM FM.
All right, we are back here, and you're listening to Entanglement Radio with Angela Levesque right here on the OMTimes Radio Network. My guest again today is Dr. Carl Greer. He has a doctorate in clinical psychology. He's a Jungian analyst and also does shamanic work, and he is the author of Change Your Story, Change Your Life. So one of the major themes, obviously, of this is that we are storytellers, and I think that so many people think that our life is happening to us instead of we are in a sense, co-creating. And of course, there's other things happening that are out of our control. But I just would like you to explain a little bit more about this idea that we are storytellers. Because again, that is shifts us into a place of empowerment versus the victim where, life is happening to us.
One of the reasons I wrote the book was I had, over many years, listened to many stories. And I heard themes of people being trapped in their story. The bridesmaid, never the bride. I can't win for losing. I have a lot of success, but I'm very unhappy. And people got trapped in those energies and those ideas. And sometimes those patterns of thought and behavior were conditioned by parents, friends, teachers, and oftentimes we're kind of unaware of where they came from, but we are, as you said, kind of in the hands of fate and other energies that we feel powerless to do anything about. And I'm suggesting that by taking time and reflecting on our stories, we have much power to rewrite them, and with the help of spirit, create a new destiny, a destiny where we have power over, as opposed to a fate where we're kind of in the current of somebody else's making. And it is a practice. I mean, you have to address it, in my opinion, in lots of different ways, look at it from a lot of different angles, and be content to making changes, Angela, at the margin, a little bit at a time, and then be amazed at how much over time things can change. I mean, I was talking to some people recently, and a person who's 50, 60 years old has lived hundreds of thousands of hours of life. And to think that any, work with a therapist or reading a book or doing exercises and, spending 8, 10, 20, 100 hours can completely overshadow a 500,000 hour life. I mean, that's an amazing thought. I'm amazed at how much we can, when we really intend to make change, make the changes, but we have to, I think, be patient with ourselves. And it is possible, I believe, for each of us to take more control over our stories than we have in the past.
Absolutely. One of the things that you talk about is the different themes that kind of show up, and that you give lots of different ways, from creating timelines, and then you have tons of questions to ask yourself within some of these different categories. So like your health and your body and being in service and your career and all of those things. So tell us a little bit about the themes that will pop up, and this idea of the archetypal energies, or the archetypes that kind of present themselves over and over again.
Well, Carl Jung came up with this idea that there are invisible energies that can influence how we think, act, and feel. And they've been present since the creation of the world, and certainly since humans have been around, and that it's possible to gain an understanding about how they're working in our lives, and by working with those energies, change the way they affect us. And that is compatible with my shamanic ideas to how things work, and how things all evolved and came about in the form of this earth. And my thought about that is that before the Big Bang, some 13 and a half or 14 billion years ago, there was this place I call the quiet, that was all energy, that was all potential before an idea, before the energization of the idea. And then from that place, our universe happened. And we have many manifestations that we can see, planets and galaxies and stars, and in this earth, plants, animals, and rocks, but many things we can't see, energies that are influencing us all the time. Cosmologists talk about dark energy and dark matter. And a Jungian would say, well, one of those energies is archetypal. And in these invisible realms, which we can work with through our dreams, through journey work, through being in nature, through ceremony and ritual, we can gain much wisdom that we can, if we're open to it, use in crafting our lives and our stories.
So you also talk about the matrix, the quiet in the matrix. What is the matrix?
The matrix is, I believe that everything at some level is connected to everything else. That within us, our thoughts, our emotions, our behaviors are connected within us. And our thoughts, emotions, and energies affect other people and other things. And we have this place, I believe, before time and space. It's outside of time and space where everything is connected. And therefore, we are consequential. And our thoughts and our actions are consequential because they do affect other things. And we, in turn, are affected by these things. Can we have more of a conscious relationship to these energies? I believe that we can.
I like that. You know, when your description of the quiet, I don't know if you're familiar with C.S. Lewis and the Chronicles of Narnia, and that's how he describes the beginning of everything is that it's quiet and it's purely black, and then all of a sudden the great Aslan, who's, you know, kind of the god-like figure, comes in and he starts with this beautiful sound that kind of reverberates out into the everything and sparks all of life and creation. And so I like that. And so, and that in itself is a metaphor, is a story that helps us understand ourselves, especially kind of these complex things like the story of creation. And you talk a lot about the symbolisms and the metaphor. And I would like you to just explain a little bit about why those symbols and those metaphors are so important to us.
Well, all the practices in my book are based on personal experiences I've had, and on a journey that I took one time years ago, Angela. It was frankly a destiny retrieval for myself. I ended up in this place that I called the quiet, and I just knew that was the name for it, and I knew what it meant for me. And my point there is that we all have the ability to have these inner experiences and make meaning of them. When we do these journeys or work in these other realms, Spirit doesn't always speak to us in sentences. If energy and the source is all vibration, we might have communication through, as you said, C.S. Lewis, a sound or an image or a color. And when we have those things happen, or a symbol, in a dream you may have the dream of a dresser. And so it may have more meaning than just the literal dresser. And I talk about ways in my book that you can interact with that image, that symbol, and find out why it appeared in your dream, what message it has for you, and what you might do to honor the fact that, in fact, it's showed up in your life.
I know that let's step back for a minute, and because you've used the word journey several times, and so people who are listening to this might not really understand this idea of a journey. Is it similar to going into a meditative state, or is it more than that?
It depends, I guess, on what happens when a person goes into a meditative state. It requires getting into an altered state where the brain waves, slow down, where you're processing more in your hindbrain and not your frontal lobes, where you have different processing. They call it an integrative processing, where your parasympathetic nervous system is in play rather than your sympathetic nervous system. Those are some of the technical terms, but you get there by breathing, by breathing exercises, by chanting, drumming, ways to still our monkey minds and to get to another place. When you're there, then it's easier to access these other realms. And by intent, there are processes in shamanism to go to the lower world, for example. It's often called a soul retrieval, where you're trying to interact with aspects of your past, your genetic past, your parents' past, or even your karmic past. You know, if you believe in past lives, your past life influences on you. And you can also journey to the upper world, the place of your becoming, where it's all possibility. So the notion in Jungian work and shamanic work is all we really have is the present, but our present is influenced by these energies from our past. So if we can get freer from the energies of our past, we're better able to make current present decisions. If we can lock into a more desirable future from the standpoint of us in spirit, that will influence the current present decisions we make as well. So journeys take us to those realms to help us get information and energy, often encountering symbols that we can work with to make changes so that we're freer in the present to do what we need to do.
Well, I know from my personal experience that I have worked with some people and gone on some journeys myself, and I can speak to the symbolism. When the first time it was just this beautiful, it looked like a kaleidoscope of sacred geometry that was just kind of exploring, and then just this amazing feeling. And you talk about this in your book, which, we're almost up on our break, but I'll introduce it and we'll bring it back up when we return. But, in the West here, we like to talk about things very intellectually, that we talk about spirituality and we talk about, and everything kind of remains in the realm of the mind and very cerebral. And when I had I've had several experiences, but one of them, everything dropped away and I had the experience of oneness. I had the experience of my soul just merging with the great everything. And that is so different from having a conversation about oneness. So we'll talk about that. I want to hear your response to that when we return here with Dr. Carl Greer. You're listening to Entanglement Radio on IOM.FM with Angela Levesque. We will be right back after this break.
Free your mind with OMTimes Radio. IOM.FM.
Welcome to The Gathering Around My Kitchen Table on Equilarium FM, Wednesdays at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Join my guests as we integrate spirituality into everyday reality with vibrant conversations, inspired interviews, and my latest channeled guidance to inspire and brighten your day. I'm Claire Johnson, and together we'll be raising vibrations across the nations.
Host your show on IOM-FM, the radio network of OMTimes Media, one of the more recognized brand names in the conscious community, and is backed by the extensive marketing reach of OMTimes. Hosting a show on IOM-FM immediately connects you with our extensive dedicated community. Simone Milasas would like you to know that business can be fun, which is why she wrote the book, Joy of Business. What if you could have the joy of business rather than the stress and struggle? Most of the time, the only thing stopping you from a thriving business is you. In the Joy of Business book, Simone gives you access consciousness tools and pragmatic ways to get out of your own way and to create the business, life, and living you know is possible and beyond what this reality says is achievable. Business is joy. It's creation. It's generative. It can be the adventure of living. You can purchase your copy of the book through Amazon or Joy of Business website, www.accessjoyofbusiness.com.
What if living didn't have to be so serious?
What if you could move beyond your problems with greater confidence and ease than you've ever imagined?
Throw your labels out the window and join the Irreverent Therapist for practical tips and a very different way of approaching the changes you would like to create.
Marilyn Bradford
and Pam Hodling
have empowered hundreds of people to come out of self-judgment, quit looking to experts, and begin to create the lives they desire.
Join us Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Eastern on the Irreverent Therapist Show.
Your conscious lifestyle on steroids. OMTimes Radio. IOM-FM.
Welcome back, and you're listening to Entanglement Radio with Angela Levesque right here on the OMTimes Radio Network. My guest again today, if you're just joining us, is Dr. Carl Greer, and we are talking about the subject of his book, Change Your Story, Change Your Life. So before the break, I was saying, and this is something that you bring up in your book, that here in the West we have a very we like to talk about spirituality, but from a very literal, logical place, and there's a lot of us that like to talk about it, but we don't really have those experiences that really connect us with Source. So I just wanted to hear a little bit about your thoughts on that.
Well, I agree that that's an issue in that, many of us will read about spirituality and will write about it and will talk about it, but we may not have had many spiritual experiences. And I'm suggesting some experiences that people can have and how to have them that are unique to each of us when we have them. But then I'm also saying, because I also know another group of people who have had many spiritual experiences, yoga people and meditators and Qigong practitioners, but they haven't found ways to bring those experiences into their everyday life to make the changes they'd like to make. So my book is designed for both of those audiences, people who are thirsting to have spiritual experiences and those who want to use those experiences to make changes in their daily living.
And that's another theme kind of that I saw in your book. And it's funny, before the break, I was kind of sharing a little bit about some of my experiences and connecting and the beautiful kaleidoscope of sacred geometry and the symbolism that was moving through my body. But it's so funny, even afterward, I really wanted to break it apart intellectually. I wanted to understand what exactly was happening there. Why did, and I don't know if I should just let that experience just be with me and not have to kind of dissect it or break it apart, or if that's part of the left brain, right brain experience that you try and encourage people to have in your book.
Well, that's a very interesting dilemma. I had appeared to me kind of an image of a dolphin one time when I was thinking about your question. And, it's kind of sometimes above the water and then in the water and above the water and in the water. And I think to me it meant there's a period to reflect and there's a period to be. And as we go through our lives, if we can have the spaces between them, reflecting and being, so that they become more one, I think that's useful. The way it's worked best for me when I'm having these experiences, really have them and not trying to make meaning of them prematurely. Just let them cook, as you're suggesting. But at some point, I think we need to engage both sides of our brain, your metaphor, and try to make some meaning of them so that we can operationalize them or make changes in our ways of living. So I think we both have to have them, let them cook, let them affect us, but also make what meanings ultimately did they have for us.
Yes, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think from my own personal experience, I didn't let them cook long. I just kind of wanted to die. After some of these experiences, I kind of looked and I said, I'll never see the world the same again. And then I just wanted to dive right back in and figure it out from a logical perspective. But I guess that's part of being human. I want to speak a little bit more. You explained archetypal energies, but I want to go a little bit deeper into recognizing some of those archetypes in your life. And I love that you used Hestia, because my company is Hestia Health, and not many people know who she is, but she's one of my favorite Greek goddesses. But are there some, Caroline Meese would say that there's 4 major archetypes that show up in our life. Are there very common archetypes that you think are, part of everyone's experience? Or do you think that each person's experience is different?
Well, I think Angela, that if everything came from the one, you experience that oneness through some of your work, that the one contains everything. So, the saying, the one in the many and the many in the one. So we're one aspect of the one that contain the one. And I think every archetype at some level, comes from the one. And it's hard to parse them all out because they all have some affinity to the others. I mean, we as humans like to conceptualize things, so we can talk about Hestia, or we can talk about Aphrodite, and we can talk about Persephone, because it helps us to get our thoughts around it. But they're all just kind of energies that can influence. Hestia can help us with solitude and maybe being unto ourselves and in certain wise reflecting, for example. So I think it's possible to take a look at our lives if we take this process and take time in a contemplative way to quiet our mind and really be honest with ourselves and say, all right, what kind of life am I living? So, for example, a woman who really is identified with being a mother, and she spends a lot of her time, mothering and taking care of people and finds fulfillment in it. But is there a price that she's paying? At some level, is she not taking care of herself? And when her children, for example, are no longer around, what will she do with that energy? And so if a person can be aware of what energies are affecting them, they can get a sense of what the outcome may be if they don't change them, and maybe start to preemptively do some things differently so that they're prepared when these inevitable life changes happen to not be rudderless or without a new way of being.
And that's one thing that was interesting for me to understand is that you can take any of these archetypes like the mother or even the victim or this, the saboteur or whatever, and they're not inherently bad. You don't look at them and say, oh, that's a bad energy to play out. But there is kind of these shadow and light sides to each one of those. And depending on how and maybe you can explain this better, but how you interact with those energies determines whether it serves you or doesn't. Could you explain a little bit more about that?
Yes. If there's one-sidedness in anything, we can suffer from that. And it's hard to know when we're in the grip of these energies if it is in fact one-sided. So that's, again, it just takes self-awareness and taking time to step back from the busyness of our lives to see how we are being affected. And the example that you were talking about, mothering, it's a wonderful positive thing. I mean, people need nurturing in mothering. But if it is overwhelming and a person becomes self-sacrificial in the process of it, then it can have a shadow. Then there's a cost. And then it may be coming with a price, both to the person who's the mother, but also the people whom they're mothering.
And is that what happens when you talk about identifying too strongly with your story? Is that what you're explaining there?
Yeah, or an aspect of your story. Another Jungian term is persona, and that is the masks, the roles that we play in life, which in a way has an archetypal component to it. And let's say the man in his job is the person calling the shots. They want to be in control. They want people to do what they want, and they feel that in terms of the work output, that's the best way to do it. But if they identify with that role, and then they go home and they're bossing their spouse around and their kids and their relatives, that doesn't go over so well. And then that man, in that example, is going to feel resentment and lack of appreciation, and he's not really going to know what to do about it, other than just feeling a lot of negative emotions about his environment and his life. if he can learn to step back and see that he's not the boss in all things, that he identifies with that role, but he's more than that. He's a guy that has the possibilities to be many people, and he just has to kind of take the time to disengage from that energy and re-engage with some other energies. And he does that, I suggest, through first being honest with himself that that's an issue for him, and then going into nature, letting his story get relativized because he realizes, as you did when you did that work and sense the oneness, that you're bigger than just what you thought you were.
Mm-hmm. That's a huge realization. That's a game changer.
It is. But it's one of these things, Angela, that's in one way it's hard, but another way it's easy. It's just one of those paradoxical things. Once you experience what you experienced, you got rewired in a way that you'll never be the same again. You're different. Now, can you always remember to bring into your life the lessons from that experience? No, I mean, maybe you can, but I can't. But at least I'm changed. I got another way of thinking about things, and I'm suggesting that people doing these practices that I suggest have the potential to have those experiences themselves that they can then use over time to make changes at the margin.
That's something I really like. Well, when we get back from the break, this show that segment, I call it Bite-Sized Brilliance. So I want to talk if you can share with us one or two little exercises, that would be wonderful, and also how we take this information and integrate it, like you were saying, to have those experiences and then not know how you deal with that. And actually, one of the questions I want to ask you when we return is as a businessman, I can see how this understanding is very complementary to being a psychologist and the healing work that you do. But I want to see, for example, how you take this information and integrate it into the business world, which on many levels is so counter to what we're talking about. So I want to talk about that more when we return with our segment on Bite-Sized Brilliance here on Entanglement Radio with Angela Levesque on IOM.FM. We'll be right back.
Connecting you with the best of the conscious minds in the world. OMTimes Radio. IOM.FM.
Hello, I'm Miriam Knight of New Consciousness Review, inviting you to my new show where I interview the rising stars of the conscious awakening. We'll explore the many faces of consciousness and action and intriguing perspectives on life, the universe, and everything in between. Join us each Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern on the Rising Stars Show.
Being a radio host on IOM.FM allows you to build your show on a rich platform with the power of the internet to fulfill your outreach goals and connect with a very specialized and global online audience, unlimited by time and distance. OMTimes Radio will provide you with web relevance, a recognizable conscious brand, and with the standard of excellence that has accompanied every single OMTimes endeavor. Host your show with OMTimes Radio Network. As difficult as it is to believe, there are places in Africa where human traffickers sell albino children and their body parts for use in magic rituals. Humanity Healing International is actively working in Uganda to change this paradigm. The Albino Rescue Project finds albino children who are at risk and places them in safe schools and environments where they can learn and grow free from fear. To learn more or to sponsor a child, visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
Time to read that inspiring book or that blog post you've been meaning to get to? In your busy world, how do you improve yourself and keep your life going? I'm Lisa Kay, and my Between Heaven and Earth radio show can transform your life just by listening. Be uplifted with inspiring topics, positive stories, and ideas that really work. Between Heaven and Earth radio is conscious living for your soul, every Wednesday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time.
The future of Internet radio is here. OMTimes Radio. IOM.FM.
All right, we are back here in the last segment that I like to call Bite-Sized Brilliance. This is where we bring it on home. And of course, this is always brought to you by HestiaHealth.com, specializing in mind, body, weight loss, energy medicine, and intuitive lifestyle coaching. And you can find out more at HestiaHealth.com, bringing you calm, open hearts, calm minds, inspired lives. So with that, before the break, I wanted to ask you that question because I think it kind of will exemplify. I said, this information that you've learned through your work, I can really see how that complements, your work with psychology and your healing work. But how do you take this information and how does it help you in the business world?
If I believe, as I do, that everything is connected with everything else. If people in a business, make the individual changes so that they are more in tune with their own stories, they become a little less anxious, more calm, because they're living the life that's more right for them. So as people do individual work, it affects the environment that they're in. But beyond that, businesses have a story as well. And they have many chapters. Their people are part of it, but their customers are, their suppliers are, their role, how are they of service. So you can think about the business proposition more than just the idea of maximizing return for your shareholders and getting the best ROI on your invested capital. All of which I believe have value in a system of trying to allocate scarce economic resources. But as we've seen on the national level and international level, it's more than that because everything's connected to everything else. So I think a businessman who starts to reflect that they too are part of a larger set of issues, and then let those realizations influence what they do in terms of compensation and allocation of resources and environmental issues, you can have transformation. And I believe that business leaders can do journey work on behalf of their business that can cause them to have a new relationship to what they do.
I love that. We should make that mandatory.
Well, I think as you're suggesting, it's a mind view and it's a way of thinking about things that people who aren't in those fields and who haven't experienced it think, oh, this is foo-foo, this is kind of new age, malarkey, and they're pretty contemptuous of it. But it's like Saul of Tarsus. Once you've had the experience, then you become a zealot in the other direction. And I know some business people that have been the cynics and now are the advocates.
Well, as I said, this is the time of the show where I like to bring it on home for my listeners. Are there things we've talked about, taking this information that you learn about this oneness through experience and not just through intellectual conversation? How do we integrate this into our daily lives? And do you have one or two exercises you'd like to share with my listeners that they can, other than, of course, buying your book, but so that they can take this information and move forward with it?
Well, maybe a couple things. One, when you encounter something in a journey or a synchronistic event in your life, rather than say go to a dream symbol book and look up what it means, or an animal, and looking up what it means, ask it. Why did you appear? What message do you have for me? What do you want from me? Engage in a conversation, an inner conversation with it. Ask it whatever questions you have, and then. This idea that of reciprocity, which I think is important when we're dealing in these realms, ask it, what can you do for it? So try to establish a relationship with these inner figures and these outer occurrences that has an aspect of mutuality and respect to it. It's amazing what you can learn by doing that. The other thing I'd say, spend some time in nature where you become aware that just as you're observing nature, nature is observing you. And if you have issues, just kind of put them out there. There's this notion in energy work, energy follows intent. So you just put your intent out there and let nature cook. We know from scientific research that if people spend time in nature, their cortisol levels tend to go down. So there's a healing that's there, and it helps relativize us and maybe helps us gain insights about these questions that otherwise seem insoluble.
That's what I think. Last week we had Dr. Susan Shemsky on, and that's her big thing is to just ask. And lots of times we forget to ask and have these conversations. We'll see something or we'll have a dream that we can tell was very significant. And instead of kind of asking, what was that about? And can you show me? We just think about it. Oh, wow, I had this crazy dream. And like you said, go and look it up in a dream book. And I think it's a different energy, and it's a far different approach to being kind of engaged and proactive with this versus, okay, what does somebody else think that means for me?
Yes. Yeah, exactly, Angela. Exactly.
So we have a few minutes left before we wrap up, because I think dreams are a good topic as well. How do you suggest that people approach their dreams? You've heard a lot of people that say you wake up and write them down, and some dreams seem very literal and some seem just crazy out there. Do you have any suggestions to helping us understand our dreams a little bit more?
Well, intend to remember them. Write them down and record them when you have them. And then say out loud one or two times your dream, and allow yourself both to say it in that part of you that's the listener. See if when you retell it, it may change. Then pick a couple of the images that you want to work with, and what comes to your mind, associate to them. I was in the kitchen, and what comes to your mind in the kitchen? Well, that's when my grandmother died when I was 8, and then retell the dream again, maybe with those associations in it. And then maybe dialogue, like I'm saying, engage in a conversation about one of these images. Try to see what your emotional state was in the dream. Do you have similar emotions in your current life that are similar to what you experienced? And then, in psychology, they talk about this triangle of insight. When did this thing first happen? Where is it happening in your life? And then if you're in therapy, where is it happening with you and your therapist? So that you gain an intellectual understanding. So these are all ways to work with your dream. And then after you've done all that, you can look at universal meanings. Like I dreamt of the foam on the ocean, which has an Aphrodite type historical component to it. And once you've done all that, bring it into your life. What are you going to do differently today as a result of working with the dream? People write huge books about dream analysis, but that's a real thumbnail sketch of some things the person can think about when they work with dreams.
I have, we're just about to wrap up, but I have this dream often where I'm about to do my radio show and I can't think of anything to say. And so then when I wake up, and of course that causes me a whole bunch of anxiety. And then I wake up and I'm like, okay, is there a place in my life where I don't feel like I'm being heard or that I'm not speaking my truth? Or is there something in my life that's causing me a lot of anxiety that is, that I'm not looking at? So that's a comment. So when that dream shows up, I'm like, oh, okay, there's some work to do because it causes me a lot of anxiety, even in my dreams. So I want to we're here in the last couple minutes, so I want to give you plenty of opportunity to share with my listeners where they can find your book, learn more about you, and anything else you'd like to leave my listeners with at this time.
Well, just to respond to what you said about the anxiety, that's a perfect example of something you could dialogue with. You could really ask it, why did you appear? What message do you have for me? Without having your conscious mind think that you know the answer to it. Allow it to speak. Allow it to have a voice, and you may be surprised at what you hear. My book can be purchased on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. My publisher is Finhorn Press. I do have a website, carlgreer.com. I'm on Facebook. And I have no more to say about those.
All right. Well, good enough then. Do you ever do any shamanic work with other people?
I do. Over the years, I've done a number of workshops that we'll have various topics, and we'll do some shamanic work. Yes, and in my practice, my healing clinical practice, I do Jungian work, and I have some shamanic aspects that I do with some people at some times.
All right. Well, I'll have to check those out. Well, I want to thank you so much for being on the program today. It was just such a delight to speak with you.
Well, likewise. I really enjoyed our conversation, Angela.
Me too. Have a great day. So again, if you want to check out his website, that's carlgreer.com. Coming up next on the OMTimes Radio Network, we have Equilarium FM with Carl Johnson, and she's going to be talking about journeying to the 8th chakra and beyond. So that should be a great show. Again, don't forget about my contest. If you are on Twitter, I want you to just send out hashtag Entanglement Radio, and I'll be putting all of those names into a hat, and you can win an intuitive reading with me. And that draw happens at the first of every month. You can find me on Facebook and on Twitter at Hestia Health and Entanglement Radio. This is Angela Levesque wishing you love and light. I'll see you next week at 12 p.m. Eastern right here on the OMTimes Radio Network. Have a great week.